Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is the Empire Captain from the Sunland State Troops, which are from Highland Miniatures. Now they are 3D prints, and I'll pop a link in the description to where you can grab the STLs for those. But funnily enough, you've probably seen one or two things like this recently, which you could probably paint in a similar manner, with a sort of old world vibe, let's say. A few of you have asked about painting Empire, and I recently started playing Total War Warhammer 3 again and have lost the plot. So yeah, Empire is where it's at. Now this method, I'm going to mention again later, isn't the fastest way of doing things, but it is easy to replicate. So that's what I'm concentrating on here today. Something which is going to look pretty cool, might take a little more time than doing it slightly more simply, but the end result, I think, is worth it. So all of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below, and today in particular, don't worry too much about the exact colours that I'm going to be using. Really, it's more about the order in which things happen. All the same, no more mucking around, let's get started. So once your miniature is assembled, first thing to do, of course, is to prime him. Now the fellow that I've got here, I have primed in Brainmatter Beige from the Army Painter. I've chosen this mostly because it was the first light beigey sort of colour that I came across. You could also use here white or Wraithbone from Citadel. I would suggest either Wraithbone or Brainmatter Beige are going to be better for what I've got in mind, because the yellows and even the purple are going to take a little bit of the warmth from that primer, and that will look quite nice. Now if you are doing something like Reikland or Middenheim, Talabecland, then of course it would be a good idea, I'd suggest, to use white instead, but for the majority of Empire State Troops, that bony sort of colour is going to work best. If you're painting Nuln, God help you, a black undercoat is probably going to be the easier choice, but for, like I said, for most State Troops, here's where you want to go. Now if you can get your hands on a copy of this, Uniforms and Heraldry of the Empire is a wonderful, wonderful resource. Absolutely brilliant bit of kit. It has been out of print for a while, so examples that you'll find online will probably go for silly pennies. All the same, if you go ahead and just search online, look for Uniforms and Heraldry of the Empire, you'll get some really good examples, pages from the book that you can use, because, man, it's just super, super helpful. Beautiful David Gallagher artwork throughout. And then what I want to sort of look at here is even just looking at the Talabecland guys. You see, uniform is kind of up in the air. The colors aren't necessarily going to have to be in exactly the same place on every guy. So you've got a fair bit of leeway. What makes that handy for a painter is that once you get bored doing 6 guys with red trousers, swap to yellow. Obviously, I'm not doing Talabecland, but that's just the first that pops to mind. If you can get this, you happen to find it at a reasonable price, go for it. It is wonderful. I'd kind of hoped that the Return of the Old World would see this being reprinted, but hey-ho, we make do with what we've got. This I've had for a very long time, and yeah, it's nice to be able to refer to. So check it out online if you can find some pages from this. So as in most cases, we're going to start from what is essentially the bottom layer and work our way up. So what I have is Guilliman flesh, and I'm going to paint, I'll let you guess, his skin. Now I'm using this because I like it. There's not really a correct color here for the skin. You can use any one that you like. And it also doesn't necessarily need to be one of these one coat paints either. You can quite happily use a traditional acrylic, bop on maybe a little bit of barbarian flesh or something, because we are going to wash this later. Now moving up to the next layer, a good place to start is going to be those puffy sleeves. So see, on his wrists here, we've got where the shirt would come out underneath, these big puffy bits. So what I'm going to do is the inner layer, the underside, I have some Moonlake coral, and I'm going to try and carefully paint that into the recesses, into the cuts in the sleeves. Now if I end up popping any of this on the, on the rest of the sleeve, and I'm almost certainly going to, I'm doing this now so that I can come back in a couple of seconds with some Brainmatter Beige from the pot and tidy up before we go on to our yellow. Now if you are like me, you're probably going to end up with a little bit of that where you don't want it. So we're going to go back with some Brainmatter Beige from the pot and just tidy up some of those edges and splashed over bits. Now, if you are looking at painting these with traditional acrylics, you're going to come back here with a normal yellow paint or something to go over the top, then you don't really need to do this stage because the acrylic will cover properly. But because I'm looking for quite a specific kind of yellow with my speed paint I'm going to use later, I do want to make sure that that's going to work. So I do this stage now. All right, now I've got here Ancient Honey, and I'm going to paint in his shirt. Now you can use, this is quite similar to Iandan Yellow, but honestly, whichever yellow you like here, just chuck it on. Luckily, this is a fair bit easier than applying the purple. Now, boy oh boy, that is intense, but it's a nice yellow. And you'll see, if I flick him around here is a better place to spot this. Anywhere that I know I'm going to go over with a metallic or a normal acrylic, I'm not worried about splashing it with that yellow. So you can be probably a little less careful with it than you might think. What I'm going to turn to now, though, is Maize Yellow. And really, this is just because I want a bit of variation between his shirt and his breeches. Now, once this dries, it is a little lighter and just a tiny wee bit less saturated. Strictly speaking, you could do the trousers in the same color, the same yellow, Ancient Honey, but I think a little bit of variation is not going to hurt. Now, generally speaking, just in how they apply, I do tend to prefer the speed paint line to contrast, but the contrast line it's a little better served as far as browns and beiges and things like that go. So what I have here, this is Garaghak Sewer, and I'm going to go over a few of the dark brown parts. And then for any bits which are going to be a slightly lighter leather, I have, big surprise, Snakebite leather. Now, I don't need to be terribly careful about how this is going on, once again, because I know metal bits are going to go over the top of this. Now, for this fellow's most remarkable tash, I'm going to use Black Templar, just straight over the top of the skin tone. I'm using this predominantly because it was in my hand when I was rummaging through my box. So this goes on. It can be any color you like here. Now on the Empire miniatures, you will regularly find things like skulls and what have you hanging from their belts because, hooray Warhammer. So I've got here Pallid Bone, and this will work for pretty much any of those little decorations. Pouches, satchels, hourglasses, things like that. Just a little bit of color to show that you haven't forgotten them. Now with all of our soft details done, what I have is some ancient stone and one of my little cheap flat-edged brushes that comes from the supermarket, basically. What I am going to do is very lightly aim to catch. I might want a little bit more on my brush there, actually. There we go. See, we start picking that up. So a few passes there over things like the feathers, the hat. Just take your time here, and you don't want to apply too much. And if you're feeling particularly saucy and you really want to catch the yellow, what you can do is a little bit of the Brainmatter Beige and actually pick out that along the edges for an even brighter highlight there. Mind how you go when you come to things like the hat and the feathers with the Brainmatter Beige, because that will quite quickly overpower those. The big cool thing here, though, is if you do end up putting a little too much of this on anywhere, what you can do is just go back to the original contrast or speed paint color, thin it down a little, and just apply it over the top of where you've splurged. You'll barely notice. Now, hindsight being what it is, you could probably skip the ancient stone entirely. I'm going to leave that step in there because I did do it, but I don't think you'd really need to. What I'm going to turn to now is one last contrast color. This is Gore-Grunta Fur, and I'm going to apply this over the pistol. Now, any bits that are going to be metallic, I'm going to just brown them up now anyway. Now, while that dries, I've got here my Leadbelcher. This I'm going to apply over pretty much all of the metallic stuff. You could also pick a darker color if you wanted here, maybe go all the way down to Iron Warriors or Heavy Metal from Army Painter. But because I know I'm going to shade this, this will probably be fine. So take your time here, like really be careful as you come up next to any of the stuff you've already painted. And then Retributor armor for any of the gold or brassy details that you want to include. Now you'll see some of these bits, which I knew were going to be gold or brass, I've already popped down a little bit of the Leadbelcher first, because the gold will just cover straight over the top of that a little bit more easily. Now there's just a couple of spots to hit with a little bit of black, and it doesn't matter too much which black you're using here. Just bop over things like scabbards and anything you want to have a black sort of lacquered look to it. We're coming into the home stretch now. What I've got here is sepia tone, and that's from the Army Painter. I've mixed this down with roughly half and half speed paint medium. What I'm going to do is apply it over his trousers here, because they lack a little bit of definition. I don't want them to go super dark, so if I was using strong tone here, for example, it would be quite intense. But sepia tone, it's really interesting because it's not as yellow as Seraphim Sepia is these days. I'd still recommend thin it down a little bit, but as you can see, it adds quite a lot to the yellow, and without making it orangey, which I really like. I'm not going to apply this over his sleeves because I want them to keep that much brighter finish, but over his trousers, and I will pop some of this on the feather too. Bloop. And I also did go over his hat with that and his skin, and I think that adds a bit of warmth without going orange, which is important. What I've got now is strong tone and speed paint medium, same half and half mix, and this time I'm going to go over his armor and his weapons. Now while that's drying, I'm going to quickly hit his base with a blast of Occultist Cloak. You could use any color you fancied here for the stones, of course, but I'm thinking because the uniform he's wearing is predominantly very bright, going for a stony grey finish on the cobblestones is going to kind of tie in with his armor, and will look pretty cool, I think. To give that a little bit more visual oomph, I have here some Great Hall Grey, and I'm going to very lightly dry brush the stones with this. It doesn't have to be this grey at all, anything a bit lighter will do the job. Could even be that ancient stone from earlier. Now for just a couple of finishing touches, I have some Pallid witch flesh. I'm just going to pop this on the end of his nose, bop, and his brows. I'll do the back of the knuckles with this as well. And then in the realm of optional but will look cool, a little bit of Targor Rageshade of all things. Now this is a deep sort of purplish shade, and I'm going to pop this just into his eye sockets. This doesn't have sort of a direct analog in many other ranges, so good to have it when you need it. Now what I have here, this is Vallejo's Model Air Steel. And funnily enough, doesn't have to come off an airbrush. It will come perfectly well off of a regular brush. What I'll do is just a few little bits of this on the edges of his armor. And you don't have to do very much of this. Just a few bits where you really want it to look clean or have a bit of a ding to it. And then my final highlight is going to be some true brass. Now this is kind of similar to Liberator Gold. Just a tiny bit more silver, and I really quite like this one. Once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is to take them outside, hit them with a matte varnish. Ordinarily, this is where I'd say, oh yeah, the basing stuff, I'll pop that in the description, but you've literally seen me do it. So, yeah, don't have to this time. So let's get a look at what our fellow looks like once he is all finished. And so, there at last, our old world style captain is complete, and I had a lot of fun painting him. Honestly, orange and purple, or yellow and purple rather, how often do you really see it? And Ostermark, yeah, I dig the colour scheme. This isn't the fastest way of doing things I would suggest, but I think for the amount of work that goes in, it's quicker than some methods, let's say, and I do like the end result. So tweaking a couple of the colour schemes, or the colour choices rather, I think you'd very easily be able to paint pretty much any of the state troops that you like, and especially if you don't fuss quite so much with the faces as I ended up.
So as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, and very importantly in this case, resin, which is all showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.